The wind screamed over the open plains like a banshee, dragging snow and ice across the scrubland in sharp, stinging sheets. It was the kind of storm that stole breath and blurred the line between earth and sky. Lone Hawk rode straight into it. His horse steady beneath him, the thick hide of his buffalo cloak pulled tight across broad shoulders. He'd seen many winters, but few this cruel. And he'd never seen anyone out in it until that night. A flicker of movement caught his eye. Just off the trail, near a crumbling patch of sage and stone. At first, he thought it was an animal, maybe a coyote or a wounded deer, but the shape didn't move like either. It was too still, too human. He brought his horse to a stop, dismounted, and approached with slow, cautious steps. The snow crunched beneath his moccasins as he knelt beside the figure. A woman, she was curled tight, like a child hiding from the world. Bare hands pressed to her face, fingers frozen and raw. Her dress was torn, wet with snow, and her boots, if she'd had any, were gone. One of her feet was bare. The other was wrapped in cloth that had soaked through hours ago. He touched her shoulder gently, but she didn't flinch. Her skin was icy. She was barely breathing. Lone Hawk looked up at the swirling sky, then back down at the stranger. She had no horse, no gear, no trail behind her. No one left a woman alone like this in Apache country unless they wanted her to die. He didn't speak English well. He didn't need to. She wouldn't have understood him anyway, not in that state. Her lips were cracked, her eyelids fluttering. He heard her whisper something, soft as a prayer or the last breath before death. No more fire. Lone Hawk pulled the heavy buffalo hide coat from his shoulders and wrapped it around her trembling body. She sank into it as if it were a lifeline. He scooped her up, cradling her in his arms, and carried her back to his horse. The mare whinnied but didn't protest as he lifted the woman into the saddle, mounting behind her and pressing her close to his chest. He spoke softly to the animal in Apache, guiding it through the blizzard toward a narrow canyon carved into the land, his people's winter camp. Snow pelted his face, soaked into his shirt. He didn't care. She wouldn't last an hour out there. Not alone. Maybe not even now. The camp was a cluster of 5 low tents, hidden between the rocks and brambles, smoke curling faintly from the chimneys of each. As he rode in, heads turned. His brothers and sisters of the Mescalero Apache were not used to seeing strangers, especially not white ones, and never carried in the arms of their fiercest warrior. He ignored their stares. He brought the woman to his own tent, the one furthest from the others. He laid her on a pile of deerskin blankets near the fire pit and lit a flame with flint and dried cedar. Warmth spread quickly in the small space, but she didn't wake out. An older woman, Pale Feather, stepped inside without asking. She was the healer, sharp-eyed and unsentimental. She took one look at the girl, scanned her breath, and went to work. She rubbed the woman's hands with bare fat, wrapped her feet, and spooned warm broth between her lips. She is almost gone, Pale Feather said without looking at him, but not yet. Lone Hawk sat back against the wall, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the woman. He didn't know why he'd brought her here. It had been years since he'd cared about the fate of anyone outside his blood. But something in her face, pale but proud, had cut through the cold. A flicker of life buried beneath the snow. Pale Feather rose. You brought her here. She lives or dies under your coat now. He said nothing, just watched the flame dance and listened to the storm howl beyond the tent flaps. Outside, the camp whispered. Inside, the woman slept under the coat of the man who didn't even know her name. She awoke to warmth and fear. The heat of a fire licked at her skin, the thick weight of fur pressing over her shoulders. But it wasn't the cold that made her heart-hammer. It was the tent walls, the foreign smell of smoke and herbs, and the dark eyes watching her from across the room. She sat up too fast. Her vision swam. "Easy," came a low voice. She couldn't place the accent. It was rough, deep, not unkind. Her gaze locked onto the man sitting cross-legged by the fire. He was massive, broad shoulders, long black braids, copper skin. He didn't move, but his presence filled the tent like a mountain filled a valley. She shrank instinctively. Beneath the fur cloak he had wrapped around her. "Where am I?" she asked, throat dry. He didn't answer right away. He tilted his head, as if studying a puzzle he hadn't quite figured out. "You safe?" he finally said. The words. Halting, her hands gripped the blanket tighter. "Who are you?" He tapped his chest once. "Lone Hawk." She swallowed. I don't remember." The truth was, she did. Pieces, anyway. A chase. Hooves pounding behind her. The sound of a musket. Running through trees until she couldn't feel her feet. And then darkness. "My name," she shook her head. "I don't know." That was a lie. But it was safer this way. He watched her with unreadable eyes, then nodded slowly, accepting her silence. "You stay. Warm, heal." She looked down. At the cloak, his cloak. The edges were frayed from years of wear. Dried snow still clung to the hem. He had given it to her. "Why?" As if sensing her thoughts, he said, "You were dying. Cold. No boots. No trail." "I was running," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "From who?" She looked at him. Something in his voice wasn't curious. It was protective. "I don't know," she lied again. Lone Hawk didn't push her. He simply rose and stepped outside the tent, letting in a brief gust of wind and murmurs from the camp. Outside. The whispers grew louder. "She's white." "What is she doing here?" "He brings danger. The army will come looking." Pale Feather stood near the fire pit with two younger women, hushed and wary. She saw Lone Hawk emerge and raised a sharp brow. "She wakes?" He nodded. "Does she speak?" "She forgets her name. She ran from soldiers." Pale Feather's lips tightened. "Or maybe she is a spy. The Bluecoats have used women before. You should not have brought her here." "I saw her dying." "You also saw her." Skin. Pale Feather's voice was like ice. "If the army learns she is here, they will come. They do not forget what you've done." Lone Hawk said nothing. He didn't answer to anyone in the camp, not even the elders. He had earned that respect. Through blood and loss. But he knew they were right to fear. Inside the tent, the woman sat huddled in silence. She felt eyes on her from all directions, none kind. When Lone Hawk returned, she flinched, though he made no move toward her. "Cold?" he asked Dot. She shook her head. He held out a cup of warm broth. She took it, hands trembling. "You have name?" She hesitated, staring into the steam. "Snowbird," she finally whispered, a name she made up in the moment. "Call me Snowbird." He tilted his head. "Why Snowbird?" She shrugged. "I used to watch them in the winters. Small white birds that didn't belong in the cold but still survived." Lone Hawk said nothing, but a flicker of something respect perhaps flashed in his eyes. "You sleep now, Snowbird." "I watch." She lay back down, the coat still wrapped around her, and tried to pretend she wasn't scared. But the truth clawed at her heart. She wasn't just running from the cold. She was running from what she'd done, and from the men who would never stop chasing her. But for now, inside a warrior's tent, in a world she didn't understand, she was warm. She was alive, Dot, and for the first time in weeks, no one was hunting her. Snowbird didn't sleep much that night. The wind outside the tent howled like a living thing, and every gust reminded her of the night she ran of blood, gunshots, and boot prints in the snow. But it wasn't the storm that kept her awake. It was the silence inside the camp. The tense, watching silence. Lone Hawk had gone to speak with someone after giving her a final glance. He'd left a small knife beside her bedding, not in threat, but as protection. It lay gleaming under the dim light of the fire, a gesture she wasn't sure how to interpret. She curled deeper into his coat and tried to sleep. By morning, the storm had passed, but something heavier lingered. The sun cut through the clouds, casting soft light over the snow-covered camp. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and voices murmured low between tents. Men sharpened weapons. Children peeked out from behind their mothers. But every gaze eventually drifted toward Lone Hawk's tent toward her. Snowbird stepped out feeling weak but restless. The world beyond the tent was alive and ancient. She saw women grinding corn, men feeding horses, and boys sparring with wooden spears. The moment they noticed her, everything slowed. Conversation ceased. One girl, no more than 10, stared with wide eyes before running to hide behind a woman's skirts. Snowbird looked down at herself. Her pale hands, her tangled blonde hair, the coat that still smelled of smoke and horse. She was foreign here, a snowflake in a world made of stone and fire. Pale Feather was the first to approach. She said nothing at first, only walked a slow circle around Snowbird, studying her. The healer's face was carved from wisdom and caution. "You walk now," she said sharply. "That is good. But you bring weight with your steps." Snowbird frowned. "I didn't ask for help." Pale Feather's eyes narrowed. "And yet help found you." Snowbird looked toward the tent. "Where is Lone Hawk?" "Hunting. He leaves before dawn. He always comes back." There was something in the woman's tone that hinted at more at history or at warning. Snowbird swallowed. "I'll be gone soon." Pale Feather's laugh was bitter and short. "Not soon enough for some." The camp council met that afternoon. Snowbird wasn't invited, but she didn't need to be. She heard enough through the whispers, saw the glares. Passed between the men and women gathered around the central fire. "She brings soldiers on our heels. We cannot trust her. She is white. Her presence is a curse." "She is alone," came Lone Hawk's deep voice, cutting through the noise like thunder. "No army chases a woman with no shoes." "And what if they come later?" asked an older man. "Will you still protect her when rifles point at our children?" "If they come, I will answer them." Silence. Snowbird pulled back from the edge of the circle, heart racing. She had never asked him to speak for her. Never wanted to put anyone in danger. She should have run further. She should have died in that snowstorm. Instead, she was here. And this warrior, this stranger, was standing between her and the wrath of his own people. That night, Lone Hawk returned to the tent in silence. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the quiet anger in his movements as he placed his weapons down beside the fire. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she whispered. He didn't look at her. "Why did you defend me?" Finally, he turned. "Because you were dying. Because I saw a woman, not an enemy." Snowbird blinked. "But I am your enemy." "Aren't I?" He stepped closer, slow and deliberate, then sat beside her on the blanket. "You are not army. You are not hunter. You run same as us." The fire crackled between them, casting shadows that danced across the walls. She lowered her voice. "You don't know what I've done. I know cold. I know fear. That is enough." His words struck something in her. A fragile pea she'd tried to bury beneath layers of survival. They sat there for a long while, in silence, as the camp watched their tent and the stars turned cold above them. What neither of them knew, what none in the camp yet realized, was that soldiers were coming, and they weren't looking for land or treaties. They were looking for her. The cold came back at night, not the snow, or the wind. Those were gone for now, but the cold that lived inside her, buried deep, surfacing. Only when the fire burned low and silence wrapped itself around the camp, Snowbird hadn't slept more than an hour at a time. When she did, it wasn't restful. It was full of images that made her chest tighten and her fingers curl into fists, images of blood. A screaming child, the sound of a musket firing too close, and men's voices barking orders in English. She'd bolt upright, breath caught in her throat, sweat beading on her temples despite the fire. And every time Lone Hawk was there, he never asked questions, never touched her, just sat by the flames, silent, watching with eyes that saw far more than they said. This night was no different. She woke with a cry soft, but sharp and clutched. The coat around her like armor. The memory had been worse this time. A soldier's face twisted in rage, a horse rearing, and then her baby ripped from her arms. She could still feel it, the loss, the helplessness. Across the tent. Lone Hawk stirred. The dreams again? She nodded, barely able to speak. Yes. He tossed another log into the fire. The crackling wood was the only sound between them for a while. Finally, she said, "They took something from me. Something I can't replace." Lone Hawk turned toward her. "Your child?" She froze. "How did you?" "Your hands," he gestured gently. "You wake with them reaching." Snowbird looked down. Her fingers were still curled, as if she'd been holding something. "Someone." "Yes," she said softly. "My baby girl." Her name was Clara. "Was?" "I don't know anymore." Her voice trembled. "The last time I saw her, a soldier tore her from me. I was on the ground. I'd been hit, kicked. I couldn't stop them. They said I wasn't fit. That a woman like me, widowed, alone, had no right raising a child with blood that wasn't pure." She swallowed. "My husband was half Cherokee." Lone Hawk's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "I ran after them," she whispered. "But the world was already burning behind me. They left me to die in the snow, and I would have. If not for you." She didn't cry. She was long past tears. But something in her voice cracked, raw and exhausted. Lone Hawk moved closer, not touching her, but just enough that the warmth of his body reached her through the firelight. "You have great pain," he said. "I live with it," she answered. He studied her. "You are not weak." Snowbird laughed bitterly. "Then why does everything I love get taken away from me?" He didn't answer. He looked into the flames like he was searching for something only he could see. Then, in a voice low and even, he said, "I had a brother, younger, brave, foolish. He fought when the soldiers came for our river lands. He died with a rifle in his hands." She turned toward him, surprised. "I'm sorry." "He died because he believed he could protect our people. He didn't run. I did." He paused. "But still I live." The weight of his confession settled between them. "You think I should go back?" she guessed. He shook his head slowly. "I think you will never stop running until you know what became of her." Snowbird looked down, her voice barely audible. "I'm afraid of what I'll find." He leaned forward slightly. "And if she still waits for you?" A lump rose in her throat. The thought was too dangerous to hold on to. "I don't even know where they took her," she said. "I can help," Lone Hawk replied, surprising even himself. Her eyes widened. "Why would you do that?" "You've already risked enough just by sheltering me." He didn't answer with words. Instead, he reached for something beside him, an old, worn satchel of leather, and pulled out a small carved pendant. It was shaped like a hawk, smooth with age. "My mother gave this to me when I was a child. When I was lost, I carried it. I want you to carry it now." She hesitated, then took it gently in her hands. The warmth of it startled her. Lone Hawk's voice was calm but firm. "If we are to find your child, you must be strong, and not alone." Outside, the moon had risen high, casting a silver light across the frozen plains. Inside, the fire glowed, And for the first time in days, Snowbird didn't feel cold anymore. The days that followed were quieter on the surface. Snowbird stayed close to Lone Hawk's tent, unsure if it was safety or shame that kept her there. She tried to make herself useful, though no one asked her to. She collected firewood, fed the horses when the children weren't looking, and helped Pale Feather grind herbs when the old healer allowed it. It didn't stop the stares. The Apache didn't trust her. She couldn't blame them. She was a stranger who had arrived wrapped in one of their warriors' coats, with no name, no tribe, and no answers. But over time, their whispers softened. It wasn't warmth, not yet, but it was no longer open hostility. And she knew why. Lone Hawk. He didn't just protect her, he stood by her, even when it earned him silence from the men he once called brothers. When the others moved away from his fire, he didn't follow them. When they scoffed at her presence, he ignored it. And slowly, something shifted. In her. And in him. One morning, she found Lone Hawk sharpening a blade by the fire, the same one he had once left at her bedside. His coat hung over her shoulders. It had become her second skin. She hadn't asked to keep it, but he never took it back. "You rise early," he said without looking up. "I couldn't sleep," she replied, sitting beside him. "Again." "Dreams?" She nodded. "I saw her this time. Clara. Clearer than ever. She was crying, reaching for me, but I couldn't move. My legs were frozen in place." He stopped sharpening. "Dreams are not just memory. Sometimes they show us what we need." She looked into the fire. "And what do I need?" He didn't answer. But she felt the weight of his gaze. They sat in silence for a long moment, until she said softly, "You could have left me that night. No one would have blamed you." "I blame myself for many things," he said, still staring at the blade, "but not for saving you." His words hit harder than she expected. Her voice cracked. "Why? Why go against your people for someone like me?" He finally looked at her. "Because you didn't cry out," he said. "Because when I saw you in the snow, I saw someone who had lost everything, but was still alive." Snowbird blinked rapidly, trying to hold herself together. "I don't feel alive," she admitted. "Not really. I'm just existing." "Then, let's change that." Her head jerked toward him. He stood, fastened his belt, and looked down at her. "You said you don't know where your child is, but the army keeps records. If she was taken, there was a place they would bring her." Her heart stuttered. You'd take me there?" "I will take you as far as I can," he said, voice low. "But once we leave, we cannot return here." "Why?" He looked to the sky. "Because the camp won't be safe after that. For me or for them." Snowbird stood, stunned. "You'd give up your place, your people, for me?" "No," he said, locking eyes with her. "For you and the child you lost, it was too much. Too much kindness. Too much risk." She couldn't carry it. She backed away. "You don't even know who I really am. I know you were beaten, hunted, and left for dead. I know you fought to survive. I know you want your daughter back more than you want your own safety." She lowered her eyes. "What if she's not there?" "Then we look elsewhere," he said. Snowbird let the silence settle before whispering, "And if she's gone?" Lone Hawk didn't blink. "Then we bury the truth, together." That afternoon, they prepared. Snowbird braided her hair for the first time in weeks, using a leather cord Pale Feather silently handed her. Lone Hawk gathered supplies, dried meat, blankets, flint, a map, and carefully tucked the carved hawk pendant into her SATCHEL. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the hills, Lone Hawk stood beside his horse, saddled and waiting. She stepped out of the tent and met his eyes. He nodded once. They were ready. And as they rode from the camp under the fading light, she felt something strange stir in her chest. It wasn't fear. Not anymore. It was hope. And something deeper, forming in the space between silence and survival, a bond that no storm could freeze. They rode westward for 2 days beneath open skies and quiet stars. The land stretched out in every direction: sagebrush, plains, red rock cliffs, and cold, shallow rivers that marked the scars of many battles. Lone Hawk traveled like a man who had done it all before, silent, focused, never wasting a glance or gesture. Snowbird followed close behind, learning to trust the rhythm of the horse beneath her and the warrior ahead of her. They didn't speak much, not at first. But somewhere between the silent miles and the campfires they built in hidden hollows, Snowbird felt a new kind of warmth growing, not from the flames, but from him. He wasn't just her protector now. He was becoming something more. On the 3rd day, they reached the edge of Fort Bridley, a military outpost she remembered only from nightmares. Located in the heart of a narrow valley, it was guarded by tall fences and 2 watchtowers. Lone Hawk spotted it from a ridge and signaled for her to stop. "This is where?" he asked. She stared down at the cluster of buildings. Her throat tightened. "Yes, that's the place." He looked at her. "You're sure?" "I remember that tower. I remember the barn with the green roof. They took Clara there after the raid. I begged them not to. They said she'd be safer under federal care." Lone Hawk's jaw clenched. Soldiers say many things when they steal. Snowbird pulled the hood of his coat tighter around her face. "How do we get in?" "We don't," he said. "Not yet." That night, they waited in a thicket of trees near the base of the ridge. Lone Hawk vanished for several hours after sunset, slipping into the dark like a shadow. He returned before dawn, his expression unreadable. "There's a man," he said. "Army clerk. Name is Ridley. Carries the key to the orphan records." Snowbird's heart leapt. "Records? You mean there's a list?" He nodded. "Names, birth dates. Where the children are sent." He handed her something folded parchment, still warm from being tucked beneath his shirt. "I watched where he put it. I copied it." Her hands trembled as she unfolded the page. Her eyes scanned the handwritten list rows of names, dates, origins. And there, near the bottom, it hit her like a lightning strike. Clara May Burke, age 2, relocated to St. Agnes Orphan Home, Santa Fe Territory. She covered her mouth, nearly dropping the page. "She's alive." Lone Hawk nodded once. "She is far, but not gone." Snowbird could hardly speak. "You found her. You found my baby." But her joy was short-lived. "There is more," Lone Hawk said, slowly. "The bounty is real." She froze. "What bounty?" He hesitated, then reached into his pack and pulled out a wanted poster. Her name was printed in bold. Catherine Burke, wanted for desertion, theft of federal child custody, and endangering a minor. Reward, $200. Alive. Snowbird's breath caught. "I didn't steal her," she whispered. "She was mine." Lone Hawk didn't flinch. "I believe you. But now they'll never stop hunting me." "They will. If we are faster." She shook her head. "You don't understand. They've labeled me a criminal. If we are caught," he said calmly, "then I will fight." Her eyes burned. "You shouldn't have to." "I chose this," he said simply. "I chose you." She didn't answer. Couldn't. The weight of it all, her daughter's name, the bounty, the way he said you settled in her bones like fire. And ice. They rode out before dawn, leaving the fort behind, heading south toward Santa Fe. The road would be long, and the dangers greater now. But for the first time since Clara was taken from her arms, Snowbird had a direction, a name, a destination. And she had him. They traveled fast and light, speaking more often now. He told her how he'd learned to read from a captured missionary. She told him how her husband died in a land dispute shot while trying to defend the very house the army later burned. They laughed once. Just once. But it felt like more than enough. That night, as they made camp by a riverbed, Snowbird stared at the fire and whispered, "I don't know if I'll be the same mother Clara remembers." Lone Hawk stirred the embers. "You will be." "More." She looked up at him. "Why do you care what happens to me?" He didn't hesitate this time. "Because when I gave you my coat, I thought I was saving your life." He met her eyes. "But now I know you're the one saving mine." The desert heat rolled in as they crossed into New Mexico territory, vast land of cracked red earth, thorn mesquite, and sky so wide it felt like judgment itself. Every mile towards Santa Fe was a mile closer to Clara, but also a mile closer to danger. Snowbird Catherine, as her name truly was, had stopped trying to hide who she'd been. Lone Hawk had never asked for the truth. He simply accepted what she offered, as if the worst parts of her didn't scare him. But now, with her daughter alive and within reach, the weight of what she had to become again pressed harder on her shoulders. She wasn't just a fugitive anymore. She was a mother with a choice to make. That evening, they stopped outside a remote trading post nestled into a bluff. Lone Hawk wanted supplies before they reached the orphanage in Santa Fe. He warned her to stay hidden while he traded. But Catherine couldn't sit idle. She slipped from the cover of the rocks and crept around the edge of the post, just enough to glimpse the world again, the world she'd once known. Wagons rolled in. Soldiers laughed on the porch. Men traded horses, barrels, bullets, and among them, a face she never expected to see. Colonel Braddock. He was older now, his mustache grayer, his metals polished to a military shine. But Catherine would never forget the man who'd signed the order to take Clara from her, who had ordered her beaten, who told her she wasn't fit to raise a child with Indian blood. She staggered back behind the rock, bile rising in her throat. When Lone Hawk returned, her face was pale, her hands shaking. "What is it?" he asked. "He's here," she rasped. "The man who started it all. Braddock." Lone Hawk's face turned to stone. "I should run," she said suddenly. "Before they recognize me. Before they stop us." "You will not run." "I have to," she insisted. "You've risked everything. Your people, your name. If I'm caught, they'll hang me. And if you're with me, I ride with you," he interrupted. "I chose this." She turned away, overwhelmed. "You don't understand. When I get Clara back, I can't live like this, on the run, looking over my shoulder every day. She deserves more." Lone Hawk was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "So you will go back? Turn yourself in? If it gives her safety? Maybe. Even if it means prison?" She couldn't answer, and that silence cut deeper than any blade. That night, they made camp in a canyon. Catherine sat apart from the fire, staring into the stars, hugging his coat tight around her. She heard Lone Hawk behind her, tending the horses, but she didn't turn. Her thoughts were loud, louder than the coyotes howling in the distance. He approached quietly and sat beside her. "You are thinking of two worlds," he said. She nodded. "One where I run, one where I surrender. And neither feels like home." She blinked back tears. "Exactly. I know this feeling," he said. "I live it." She turned to him, surprised. "I was raised Apache," he continued, "but taught English by a Jesuit missionary. I learned their words, their war, their lies. I know their world. I do not belong there. But sometimes I do not belong in mine either." Catherine's voice broke. "Then where do we belong?" Lone Hawk looked up at the stars. "Maybe not in any place, but with the right people. We don't need one." She stared at him for a long moment. "And who are your people now?" His eyes met hers, and for once There was no silence between them. You. The word was simple, quiet, but it shook her. Her hand reached for his without thinking. He took it, warm and strong, calloused from years of survival, but gentle now, just for her. The next morning they packed in silence. The road to Santa Fe was only a few days away, but Catherine knew everything would change when they reached it. She would either hold her daughter again or lose her for good, and behind that hope was a darker truth. She might have to choose between being free or being a mother. And Lone Hawk might have to choose between love and his very life. They rode on, the dust rising behind them, with two hearts caught between two worlds that had never allowed space for a love like theirs. The road into Santa Fe wound through a narrow gorge of sun-scorched cliffs, each turn feeling tighter than the last. Catherine's heart beat faster with every mile. Clara, her little girl, her stolen child, was near, maybe just beyond the next bend, but so were men who wanted her dead. Lone Hawk's horse moved in perfect rhythm with hers, the Apache warrior quiet but alert. He'd been watching the trail behind them more than the road ahead. Catherine didn't need to ask why. "They're following us," he said when they stopped near a dry stream to water the horses. "How many?" she asked, voice barely above. A whisper. He looked at the dust cloud rising far behind. "4, cavalry. They ride hard." She stared ahead. "Then we don't have much time." They reached Santa Fe at dusk, blending into the bustle of wagons, adobe buildings, and shouting merchants. Lone Hawk draped himself in a wool serape, tucking his long braids beneath a broad-brimmed hat. It wasn't much of a disguise, but enough to avoid questions. Catherine kept her head down. The bounty poster burned into her thoughts. The orphanage stood at the far edge of town, a walled compound with tall iron gates and stained glass windows, guarded not by soldiers, but by silence. Saint Agnes, the name from the record. Catherine nearly collapsed at the sight of it. "She's in there." Lone Hawk tied the horses beneath a cottonwood tree and scouted the perimeter. "There's a back gate," he said. "Barred, but no guards." "I don't care about gates," Catherine said, her voice shaking. "I want to see her. Wait until dark. I can't wait anymore." Lone Hawk placed a hand on her shoulder. "You will see her. But not if we're caught before we try." That night, beneath a sky full of stars, they crept along the back wall. Catherine's breath hitched as she climbed behind him, her boots silent on the dirt. The iron gate was rusted but heavy. Lone Hawk wedged it open just wide enough for her to slip through. The courtyard beyond was quiet, except for the faint cry of a child. Catherine's heart stopped. That cry. She turned toward the chapel window, lit from within by a single flickering lamp. Inside, beds lined the walls. Children slept in them, tucked beneath thin blankets. In the far corner, a small figure stirred, fussing softly in her sleep. Catherine pressed against the window, hand to the glass. "Clara," she whispered. Child stirred. Sat up. Catherine's tears spilled freely. Before she could call out again, a door slammed behind her. "Step away from the building," barked a voice. 2 soldiers, rifles drawn, faces twisted in suspicion. Lone Hawk appeared behind them, moving like lightning. One soldier spun around. 2 slow Lone Hawks slammed the butt of his knife into the man's skull. He dropped. The other soldier fired, missing wide. Lone Hawk tackled him to the ground before he could reload. Catherine was already running. Inside the orphanage, a nun screamed as she burst through the door. Children cried out in confusion, but Catherine didn't stop. She dropped to her knees at Clara's bedside. The little girl blinked, dazed and afraid. Catherine reached out slowly, heart in her throat. "Clara, it's me, baby. It's Mama." Clara looked at her for one long moment, then suddenly wailed and reached for her. Catherine pulled her into her arms, holding her tight, sobbing into her hair. "I'm here. I'm here." I'm never leaving you again." Outside, chaos bloomed out more. Soldiers were coming. Lone Hawk dragged the second soldier's unconscious body into the bushes and whistled sharply to the horses. Catherine ran toward him, Clara bundled in her arms. "She's here. She's really here," she cried. He nodded once. "Ride, now." They mounted fast. The child whimpered in Catherine's arms as the horses thundered down the dark road, bullets cracking behind them. Dust rose like smoke, and the wind tore at their faces. A shot grazed Lone Hawk's shoulder. He didn't flinch. He kept riding, faster, harder, away from the town that wanted them caged or dead, toward freedom, toward something new. When dawn finally broke, they were miles from Santa Fe, deep in the high desert, hidden in a narrow canyon surrounded by stone and silence. Lone Hawk collapsed beside the fire, blood seeping from his shoulder. Catherine dropped beside him, still clutching Clara, who now slept wrapped in his old coat. "You're hurt," she whispered. "I've had worse," he grunted, his face pale. She reached for his hand, strong and trembling. "You saved her." He shook his head, weakly smiling. "You did." "No," she said. "We did, together." And in that quiet canyon, where the law couldn't reach and time itself seemed to pause, Catherine held her daughter close and realized she was no longer running. She was fighting, and she wasn't alone. The canyon held its breath. Morning sunlight filtered through sandstone walls, casting gold over the earth as Catherine watched Lone Hawk sleep, his shoulder bandaged, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Clara slept beside him, tiny, hands curled in the folds of his coat, her daughter, her whole heart. But safety, Catherine knew, was borrowed time. They couldn't hide here forever. She stepped outside the narrow cave, letting the wind sting her cheeks. Her mind raced. Santa Fe was boiling by now. Soldiers would be searching every road, every ranch, every creek bed. There'd be posters nailed to every tree with her name on them, and maybe his two. She had stolen back what was hers. Now the world would want to make her pay. By midday, Lone Hawk stirred. His eyes opened, sharp even in pain. "You stayed," he said quietly. "I always will." He sat up slowly, wincing. "You have her now. You can run. You don't need me." Catherine shot him a look. "You really think I could walk away after everything we've been through?" "She's your child," he said. "You could go east, find a new name, a new life, and leave behind the only man who ever saw me as more than a mistake." He didn't answer. She knelt beside him and cupped his face. "You think I don't know what you've given up for me? For us? You've carried me through hell and back and still looked at me like I was worth something. Don't you dare think I'd walk away now." He lowered his head, her words cutting deep but mending deeper. Later that day, they met in council with Lone Hawk's closest kin, his half-brother, Stone Wolf, and a small band of warriors who had tracked them to the Fee Canyon. Catherine tensed when they arrived, unsure whether she'd be welcomed or blamed. But Stone Wolf looked at the sleeping child in her arms and said simply, "She has your fire. She need it." Then he turned to Lone Hawk. "You've made your choice." "I have," Lone Hawk replied. Stone Wolf nodded once. "Then we'll ride with you, as long as you live." Catherine felt tears sting her eyes again, but this time from something close to peace. But peace didn't last. That night, a rider came from the south, bloodied and breathless. "Cavalry coming fast," he gasped. 30 strong. 2 days out, headed straight here. Panic rippled through the camp. "They'll find the canyon," said Stone Wolf grimly. "We must move the women and children tonight." Lone Hawk turned to Catherine. "You and Clara go with them, now." "No," she said, fiercely. "I won't run again. This isn't running. It's surviving. Then we survive together." He grabbed her arms, eyes wild. If they capture you, they'll hang you. If they capture me, they'll bury me without a name. And if we're separated again, she said, we'll die anyway. They argued deep into the night. But eventually, a plan formed. Stone Wolf would lead half the warriors to misdirect the soldiers with decoys and scattered trails. Catherine. Lone Hawk and Clara would take the river past dangerous narrow and barely known to the army. If they could cross the San Juan and disappear into the northern frontier, they'd be out of reach. New Mexico would no longer hold their chains. As dawn cracked open the sky, they saddled up. Clara, dressed in a boy's jacket and straw hat, rode wrapped in a blanket on Catherine's lap, half asleep but content. Lone Hawk looked to the horizon. Then to Catherine, "You ready to leave all of it behind?" he asked. She met his eyes. "Only if you're riding with me." He smiled, then tired, scarred, and full of quiet fire. "I was never riding anywhere else." As they rode out of the canyon, the wind whispered through the trees. Catherine looked back once at the life that had broken her, at the place where she'd nearly lost everything, and then she looked forward to a new world, unpromised, unknown, but finally theirs. For the first time in her life, Catherine wasn't fleeing a past. She was chasing a future. Snow began to fall. Gently as they reached the high country, it clung to the pines like lace and dusted Catherine's shoulders with quiet grace. The river trail had nearly killed them twice, once when the path crumbled beneath Lone Hawk's horse, and again when freezing rapids nearly swept away their only food pack. But now they were here, north of the San Juan, beyond the maps and far from the reach of men who wanted to own them. Clara, bundled in wool and pressed close to Catherine's chest, slept peacefully. They were free. A small cabin stood in a hidden valley, old, leaning slightly but dry and waiting. Lone Hawk had known it was there. It had once belonged to a solitary trapper who traded with his people, a man long gone and never replaced. Now it would be home. They built fires, patched the roof with pine boughs, and boiled snow for water. Lone Hawk hunted quietly, returning each day with rabbits or grouse. Catherine gathered herbs, dried meat, and nursed Clara through a brief fever. Time slowed. Winter blanketed everything. They were alone, but not lonely. One morning, Catherine stepped outside with Clara and stared at the valley below. Her breath rose in silver clouds. Behind her, Lone Hawk emerged shirtless, despite the chill, his skin steaming as he poured water over his head. He grinned when he saw her watching. "You planning to warm me up?" he teased. Catherine smirked. "That depends. Can you keep up with a woman who just outran the entire U.S. Army?" He wrapped an arm around her, pressing his forehead to hers. "I'd follow you through fire." "I already did," she whispered. "And you didn't flinch." That night, under a sky sharp with stars, Catherine lit a small candle inside the cabin and knelt beside Clara's bed. The little girl was tucked beneath the same coat Lone Hawk had given her on that first freezing night, the one that had started it all. "You know," she whispered to her daughter, "you were never lost. You were always pulling me forward." She kissed her brow and turned to find Lone Hawk leaning in the doorway, silent and smiling. "I made a vow once," she said, "that if I ever found her, I'd never leave her again." He crossed the floor and took her hand. "And if I vow the same to never leave either of you, what would you say?" She looked up, tears bright in her eyes. "I'd say you already have." In the spring, the cabin bloomed with wildflowers. Clara chased butterflies across the valley, her laughter echoing through the hills. Catherine planted beans and corn in the soft soil beside the stream. Lone Hawk built her a table, then carved their initials into one of the legs, C+L+C, encircled by a hawk's wing. Sometimes Catherine would wake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, sure it had all been a dream. But then she'd reach over and find his hand, calloused and warm, Fingers curled gently around hers, and she'd remember. She wasn't running anymore. She was home. Years later, travelers passing through the North Country would speak of a wild valley where no law reached, only peace. They'd say a strong Apache lived there, with a woman too stubborn for the world and a daughter with bright eyes and a voice like thunder. They'd never know the whole story, but if they stayed long enough to hear it from Catherine herself, perhaps over a pot of stew or while watching Clara ride bareback across the hills, they'd learn that kindness could change a life, and that one coat, offered in silence on a frozen night, was never just about warmth. It was the beginning of everything.